In this case, I think that Mr. McCallum should have shown more restraint and not immerse himself in an already very complicated judicial process.
Well, I was somewhat astonished to see an ambassador speak so openly on this issue, which is a very delicate issue between Canada and China with the Americans. But I came to the conclusion quite rapidly that John, who is a very disciplined man, an experienced man, didn't do it of his own volition.
There are mixed reactions, as you just heard today, to what Canada's ambassador to China had to say about the Meng Wanzhou case. Speaking to some media, John McCallum said the Huawei CFO has a good chance of avoiding extradition. The official opposition is calling it political interference and says McCallum should be fired. Meng is on house arrest in Vancouver, where she was detained on December 1st on a request from American authorities. So, did McCallum's comments help or hurt the efforts with China? Gordon Houlden is a former Canadian diplomat to China. He's now the director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. Professor Houlden joins me from Edmonton. Hi there, Professor. Nice to see you again. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Just want to start off initially by asking, were you surprised to hear Ambassador McCallum say that Meng Wanzhou has quite good, quote, quite good and, quote, strong arguments to fight extradition?
I was surprised because there had been to this point really a tight lid kept on comments about the judicial process per se, other than just explaining how it was going to unfold. On the other hand, we heard on Monday Ambassador McNaughton in Washington express frustration with the Americans over the risk that they are, in effect, allowing Canada to be beaten up while potentially using Meng as a trade bargaining chip. So I think we're seeing a shift in emphasis from the government, not just from Ambassador McCallum.
What do you think about that as a strategy? Do you think it will be effective?
It's too early to tell. I'd love to be more definitive. The challenge we have is that, for one thing, things are before the court, or will be very shortly. The extradition process will be managed by a justice of the BC Supreme Court, and that outcome the government cannot directly interfere with. Once that's done, it then will be an opportunity down the road, and this could be down a long road. There is a last chance for the Minister of Justice to say whether or not this has been a political process. So there still is a look-in from the government of Canada after the extradition process has been taken, has been completed, but that will be well off in the future.
For a long time now, and we've spoken to you on the show about this before, the government has insisted that this is a country of the rule of law and has really gone out of its way to try and say that the process that's taking place is completely apart from anything political. And we've talked at length about how China would not understand that because their system works so differently, and it would be a hard message for them to absorb. Do Ambassador McCallum's comments today hurt the argument that Canada has been trying to make about our country adhering to the rule of law?
There is a risk of it will be undercut to some extent. On Tuesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, two-thirds of the whole press conference were taken up with criticism of Canada. But today, Wednesday, the Chinese reaction from the China Global Television Network, which reported in a very favorable tone Ambassador McCallum's comments without the invective that we have been receiving in almost every commentary in the Chinese media in recent weeks. So Chinese picked this up instantly and clearly liked what they heard.
What does that say? And what kind of impact could that potentially, does that help us in China in any way?
Well, it'll help us in China in the sense that it, at least for the time being, perhaps reduce some of the pressure from China. They will now be hopeful of an outcome which is positive, and there's a risk they may misread this as a signal, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we'll make this problem go away, she has a good case. I still believe at the end of the day, China does not believe that we have systems in the United States or Canada which are completely impervious to the government interference in the judicial process. So this may have them believe that we have the means, confirm their belief that we have the means to make this problem go away. That would potentially create a bigger problem if it doesn't go away.
What
buy some short-term pleasure.
I'm sorry. What about the ability, you referenced sort of the process that happens now going forward. What about the ability of the Justice Minister ultimately to take into account some of the things McCallum pointed out, for example, Donald Trump's comments about tying this to trade with China, or even McCallum's comments himself? Is that something that you would expect the Justice Minister to take into account should the eventually the treaty end up there? The extradition order end up there, which it would have to?
Well, the vast majority of extradition requests that come to the Justice Minister actually come to Canada. The vast majority, 90% plus, I believe, are approved and go forward. So the Justice Minister would have to have some credible grounds to come to decision other than that of the judge who's managing the extradition process. If subsequent American statements or comments might give him some more fuel in that regard, America is in the midst of about to relaunch again another round of discussions on the trade matter. If the judge were in the extradition procedures were to, even if he determined that the extradition should go forward, if he were to provide some language that might create some measure of doubt. But I don't think that the Minister of Justice is simply on a political diplomatic judgment. The extradition treaty is clear. There has to be a judgment. This is a political affair. So I think that the odds are still, it goes forward, but the opening has been created there, and Ambassador McCallum has stoked that prospect.
Do you think what Ambassador McCallum said throughout his press conference amounts to political interference?
Very, very good question. It clearly indicates, he didn't urge the court to a certain decision. He made a comment on what he thought the value of the strength. So I think it's going to be in a gray area there. And I'm sure legal scholars will debate that in the days to come. But the audience he was speaking to, which I understand was principally Chinese language journalists, where there may be a lot of sympathy for that perspective, they will clearly like that. So the audience to which he's speaking, I think, will appreciate that. The court itself, I would argue, must and will disregard those comments. We do have an independent judicial system. I think he's probably treading on the edges, but certainly it will have at least ameliorated some of the pressure from China in the short run. But that's only short run. It'll really depend how this goes forward, and I think the Chinese will be very disappointed how long this process may take.
For sure. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Houlden. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you very much.